Last time, I added new playable and non-playable characters to the game, as well as this drone. And then, I asked if you folks preferred the conga line of companions that you see in games like The Binding of Isaac, or if you preferred a single companion that you could get attached to. And the response for this was split. People said they liked the conga line because it meant that there was a lot of variety in the game. But others said they preferred the single companion because then it could be an actual character in the story, and they could be emotionally invested in this companion character. So I will be keeping both of those answers in mind. I am leaning more towards keeping this single character just because it does allow me to play with the story a bit, but I will try to think up some way to add variety to that part of the game. And then in this video, we'll be talking about new mechanics and UI elements that I'm adding to the game in an attempt to solve problems that came up back in playtesting. The old version of the game has been played over 110,000 times now, which is nuts, but that meant I got a lot of feedback. So some of these new mechanics are being added specifically because of that. Starting with the UI, we remade the health and energy bar, keeping that clunky style that we borrowed from Nuclear Throne. I love the simplicity of that game's UI. It looks a little rough, but it fits the whole look of the game, and it contrasts really well against the gameplay. Now, this is stuff that I haven't touched in literally over a year. When I made the first version of this game for GDevelop as an example game, I added the health in then, and I haven't really touched it since. So looking through this code was kind of like looking through an old attic in an episode of Hoarders. After adding the new objects into the scene and manually putting them in place, getting it to expand with the player's health was just a matter of changing the width in the equation. But I had some trouble positioning the text. I was trying to figure out how this math worked. But then after fiddling with it, I realized that this is just silly. I could just call the center of the object and use that as the point for the text. This whole equation thing I had going on is something past me decided it was a good idea, but past me didn't know what I was doing. So now it looks like this, and it works. Next was the energy bar. And again, it was a long time ago that I put this in, so when I opened it up and saw that there were two animations of the object, and when the game starts it plays the second animation, I just didn't bother digging through the code for this one, and put the new image in for both the first and second animation, and it worked. So I called it a night. I then checked to make sure that it actually worked in-game, and the problem with making a fun game is that I keep losing more time to playtesting than I really should. It's a good problem, I guess, but kind of a waste of time. For this, Artman Oil had made an animation to play along with when the ability is used, to give the game more impact and oomph when it happens. And of course, I forgot the UI is all 2x scale, so I had to go do that and then bring it back into the game. But using the animation the way that Artman Oil had suggested meant I would need to go hunt down the old code and learn why there were two animations. And since I had already decided I wasn't going to do that, I just cut up the animations and used it when the bar fills up instead. This was easier to do, but I did this because playing the animation when you attack would be drawing the player's eye to the UI bar instead of what's happening in the gameplay. So using this effect when the bar fills up, rather than when you attack, tells the player that their ability is ready to use, and doesn't distract them from the gameplay. Then with that done, I moved the text that had been awkwardly sitting at the bottom of the screen to the spots that we'd made for them in the new UI. And I think this looks much cleaner, but we'll have to add some kind of tutorials or something to tell the player that this is the damage text and it represents how much damage you're going to take when you get hit. Because there's no longer that text that literally says damage anymore. But now it's time for the chaos bar. Artman Oil throws a lot of ideas at me while we're working. Most of the time I veto them because they don't make sense with the kind of game we're making, or I point out how much work would need to be done to add that awesome new feature in, and we decide not to do it. But this time they suggested a combo meter, and I was about to say no, but then I thought about it. I originally wanted to add a timer to the game that would force the player to rush if they wanted to get as many points as possible in a single run. But when I mentioned this here on the channel, you folks politely told me no. So the combo meter could effectively be doing the same thing as the timer if we added a decay to the combo meter and made it impact your damage. So the faster you kill, the more damage you'll do, and the faster you'll be able to kill, kind of in this perpetual loop. And since I think the most fun way to play this game is by rushing through it and getting into the groove along with the music, this would work as a pushing and pulling force. Pulling the player by giving them extra damage for killing, and pushing the player by reducing their damage if they slow down. The reason I was going to add the timer was because some people were going full tank and just tanking their way through the higher levels in the game, and taking absolutely forever to kill anything because they didn't take any of the damage upgrades. So this would hopefully be a mechanical incentive to get more players to focus on moving fast and killing quickly. So to get this set up, I created some variables and a timer to use with the bars. I've never done anything like this before, so I wasn't sure how I would do it. It's going to be like a boss's health bar with multiple layers as you gain and lose chaos points. I tried looking up how to do this online. I figured there had to be some tutorials out there for this sort of mechanic. It's pretty common in most games, or at least games that have big bosses. And I weirdly couldn't find any. Most of the videos coming up were gameplay boss fight videos or game analysis videos, but maybe I was just typing in the wrong thing. Either way though, I had to get to work and figure it out myself. Obviously this isn't anything complicated, it's just 5 different bars that raise or lower based on a number value. So I got it working, but upside down the first time, and quickly fixed it by changing the point where it expands from. And once I had it working, I took it into the game to playtest a little bit, and lost another half an hour playtesting. But with the bars working, going up and down, now it was time to do the multiplier, having it actually multiply the damage done by the player. I first tossed in a rough equation to multiply the damage from 1x to 3x, depending on where it is on the scale. But when playtesting, I noticed that the maximum of the bar wasn't dealing 3 times damage, so something had to be wrong. What I had originally set up was rounding the multiplier down to 0, because I was using floor. But after fixing that, it still wasn't multiplying properly. Wanna know why it wasn't working now? Because I didn't update the equation used for the text. It was still just showing the number from before the change. So the damage was happening, but the text up on screen, that wasn't changed. I had spent so much time trying to figure out what the hell was going on. After I got over the blow to my pride, I got back to work and playtested some more to make sure it was finally working as intended. The next thing we wanted to do was link the chaos bar with some kind of visual change, so you could see the link between the bar and the gameplay. And I thought it would be a really cool idea to have the bullets and damage text change color along with the chaos bar. And that way you would directly see the impact the chaos bar is having on your damage. So I changed the bullets to white and tinted them in engine when they're fired to match the color of the chaos bar. And it looked terrible. Absolutely terrible. We realized that we had picked the color of the bullets originally for a reason, and doing this was just kind of tossing that out. So we went back to the bullet color from before, but we still wanted some kind of visual effect to tell the player they were more powerful now than they were before as a result of the chaos bar. So I tried adding an area of particles around the player, first looking like this. Then I tried to change it and it came out looking like this, and finally I condensed that down and it turned into this like particle trail behind the player. And it felt very Super Saiyan. Even further beyond! And that is exactly what I wanted. Then Art started sending me effects to play with when the chaos level was hit. First I had to scale them and align them with the bar that was already in the UI. And I added in some dev hacks that would let me trigger them without actually playing the game this time, so I wouldn't lose more time playing the game. But then I had to figure out exactly how to trigger them at the right time. The problem with this was the decay was continuously ticking, so when you pass a level, it could just slip back down to the one before it, before the animation even finished playing, which is super unsatisfying. So what I did was link the animations to the decay and prevented the decay from happening while the animations play, and then added a little bit of buffer at the end before the decay could actually start. And this felt way better. Knowing that you had a couple of seconds to enjoy that new spike in power before you had to rush off and get more points, gave you more confidence and control over what was happening in the room, and made sure you knew how much damage you were able to do, instead of needing to constantly run around and pick up points to offset the decay. But now that the bar was working and was animated, it was time for the last mechanic for the Chaos Bar, and that was the lock. The lock was going to pop up and lock the Chaos Bar decay during boss fights, as an indicator for the player that they don't have to worry anymore about the Chaos Bar decaying during the boss fight, so they could focus on fighting the boss and not worry about how much damage they're doing. And this works as a reward for people who played aggressively early on by locking in this high damage multiplier that they get to use for the entire boss fight. So we needed an image or animation to tell the player that the bar was now locked. But before I get to that part, I need to ask you a favor. Could you tell me what makes you buy a game on Steam? Think about which parts you look at or interact with when you're looking to buy a game on Steam. I'm currently in the process of getting my game's Steam page set up, and of course there are resources and videos out there about the topic, but I want to hear what you think is important when you're looking at a Steam page. Like, do you usually bother to read the game description at all? Or do you do what I do? I will usually skip through the video trailer, look at the tags to get an idea of the game's genre, and then look at the price. And if all three of those things line up, I'll usually buy it. Anyhow, let me know in the comments. I asked Art to send me an image of a lock, maybe with a little closing animation, and told them roughly the size it needed to be. And usually Art is spot on when I ask for specific things. So when they sent me the lock animation, I blew it up to 2x scale and put it into the scene, and I noticed it was a bit big, but figured it'll be fine. I'm sure there's some artistic reason for it. But after playing with the animation in Asprite, trying several different tweens and tweaks, and giving it a good solid try, I eventually had to give up and ask them to do it again. So Art sent me a new lock right away, but this time there was no animation. And I was so in my head about not wanting to keep poking and asking for work to be done again, because Art already has a giant list of things to do, and I'm trying to limit the number of times I ask for things to be redone, unless it's super important. So I did some animating of my own. I first broke the top of the image off so it wasn't connected as the first frame, and then slammed it together in the way that Art's old animation did, and then gave it some squash and stretch. Then I took it over into the engine and applied a tween and sound effect to it, and it looked like this. Starting with a tween that bounced in and up a little bit before it finally slammed back down again. And I added a tween rotation with a randomized angle to make it a little more interesting when it pops in. And someone from the Game Dev Fireside Discord suggested that I make the slam a little more impactful with some shake. Then, for the animation when you beat the boss and leave the room, I broke the image into 2 different sprites, and applied a tween and a random angle for each part of the lock. This way it looks like it broke in 2 and was falling down. And I think it turned out really well. And the last thing we did in this stretch, and I hate to tag this in as the last tiny part of the video because I know Art spent a lot of time making these, but it took me like 5 minutes, was changing out the old upgrade art and animations. Art had made this new upgrade animation with crates instead of coins a long time ago, so I added it in place of when the upgrades pop up, and removed the pop-up tween and instead made it into a pop-out. Again with a slight rotation to make them a little more interesting when they popped out. And then I just waited for Art to send me the new art. And the first one they sent me made me a little concerned. It is definitely a Pokemon. But then they sent me the rest of them, and they're all really colorful and bright. And I think I've said pretty too many times in this video, but pretty. So I replaced the old art, and ta-da! I need to add some sound effects and tweak a few things, but this is so much more impressive than the old art. A huge thank you to my patrons. Because of them, my coffee cup is full. And as always, the links to the places that I hang out are down below, and if you decide to click on one, then I'll see you there.